as there's a demand, there will be a supply, there will be a chain. I think some of this, I mean, a lot of the British people are against this, but some of this, as we know, politics is downstream of culture, and there are endless radio shows that are not GB News and are not Talk TV and my podcast and things like that, who won't name the problem. And the problem is that there are people coming in their thousands and thousands from cultures that are very different from our own. And you even see, I mean, I was on LBC the other day, and I really like Ian Dale. He's a very empathetic, lovely man. But he was having a go at this woman. You might have seen it. It was a viral clip. And he was saying to her, oh, well, what's wrong with Afghani culture? What's wrong with the culture over there in all of these things? And I just thought, well, let's first name what we think our culture is, because nobody seems to be able to do that. Let's name what it is. Let's try and put our heads together and say, what do we believe in? And we don't believe in, selling young boys to dance for adult men. We don't believe in grooming gangs. We don't believe in what is it? 20 times higher the rate of sexual offence committed by Afghanistani immigrants in the UK than native Brits, or whatever you might call it. Those are things we don't believe in and are not part of our culture. So I think one thing we need to do is to start incentivizing radio hosts and TV hosts from mainstream channels to start actually talking and not patronizing their viewers.
Yeah, the cultural relativism is just it's just absurd. I thought we'd kind of moved away from that in the wokeness Overton window. But anyway, Andrew Gold, really appreciate your time on this. Thank you very much indeed. Political commentator and podcaster, host of the Heretics podcast.
Well, we should say that the Home Office has been in touch, saying we all want to end dangerous small boat crossings which fuel organised criminal activity but put vulnerable lives at risk and undermine the security of our borders. We are determined to tackle the gangs behind that trade, and our law enforcement agencies have delivered dozens of high-impact disruptions against them in the past year.
Right, well, let's head to Downing Street now to speak to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who's just left a briefing with the Prime Minister's spokesperson, I believe. Catherine, tell us, what are the government saying on this issue today?
Yes, well, the promise, of course, a year ago was to smash the gangs. The numbers are up 50% on this time last year. They were keen to stress that they're pretty much throwing everything at this. So they say. They were talking about the deals that they've recently done with France, with Germany. Of course, none of those have actually kicked in yet. And I said, look, you might say there's no silver bullet, but you've had a year to get on top of this. The numbers are going in the wrong direction. I said, what would be your end-of-year grades that you would give yourself for achievement and effort? You won't be amazed to know that they didn't want to answer that. They battered it away. But look, I think this was the last lunchtime lobby briefing of this sort of parliamentary year. And what really struck me was what came out of Cabinet, because Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, has been doing a lot of work on social cohesion, and there was a lot of conversation about that. Now, we are, of course, coming up to the anniversary of those horrendous riots following the murders of the little girls in Southport. Now, last year, when all that was happening, the Prime Minister was labelling people far right. Again, at the beginning of the year with the grooming gangs, the Prime Minister used the phrase far right bandwagon. There has been now a total change, I would say, in tone. The government is not doing that at all. It's saying people's concerns are legitimate and that the government has got to address them. So talking about where those riots were last year, they say that 17 of the 18 areas that saw riots were some of the most deprived areas of the country, and that deindustrialization, globalization, tech changes, immigration, they specifically mentioned immigration too, are factors, and that the government is going to need to act on people's concerns. We asked how worried they were about further unrest this year. They clearly are concerned about that. So a shift in tone, a recognition of people's concerns being genuine, but of course how you address those concerns and how you find answers for these issues, well, that's another matter.
Yeah, they're being confronted with the reality that there is a lot of issues out there. Catherine Forster, thank you very much indeed, political correspondent there. We are going to talk to Christopher Hope as well, because there's a big shadow cabinet reshuffle going on in the Conservative Party. Christopher, what do we know so far?
Tom, well, that person on screen now, just moments ago, was Sir James Cleverly. He is the new shadow Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Shadowing that person, Angela Rayner, of course, someone tipped by many to be the successor to Sir Keir Starmer at some point. We're told by the Tories he'll take the fight to Labour on housing, where the Tories say that the Labour have slashed housing targets for London, and he'll focus on bread and butter Tory causes like keeping council tax low. I find it interesting they're saying he'll be focused on London, because he is tipped by some as at some point maybe being the Tory candidate in the next London mayoral election. But for now, he's a housing secretary, or the new housing secretary. Kevin Hollingrake, he's in as a new party chairman. He'll be fighting alongside Tory councillors and exposing what the party says is inept Labour and Reform councils, and also he'll hold the government to account on Islamophobia, this new definition which is coming this autumn. Stuart Andrew, he's moved from culture to health. He's now the shadow health secretary. Earlier today we were told it was going to be, going to be Julia Lopez. That wasn't confirmed by the Tory party, but things are movable in any reshuffle. Now we know it's going to be Stuart Andrew. He's previously worked for the British Heart Foundation. He'll take the fight to the Labour Party on the issue of doctors' strikes, which will be happening on Wes Streeting's watch, and also, I imagine, looking at the issue of productivity. Are we getting our bang for our buck for that investment and all that tax money raised last year for the NHS? And just very finally, Nigel Huddleston, the former party chairman, he is now at Culture, Media and Sport, replacing Stuart Andrew there. So he'll be there. He was a DCMS minister during the pandemic. That's what we know so far. The full reshuffle later today. Stay tuned to GB News.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Christopher Hope there, our political editor, bringing us the latest from that Tory reshuffle. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up.
Yes, breaking news. A husband who stabbed his wife to death as she pushed a pram is jailed for life. More on that later.
But after the break, Sir Keir Starmer, he insisted yesterday there's a lot of housing available to accommodate both the rising number of homeless people in this country and also migrants and asylum seekers.
There's style, and then there's impeccable British style of Brooke Taverner. Tailored, timeless, and unmistakably you. Wherever your day takes you, whatever the occasion, look your best. With over 100 years of quality and craftsmanship, you'll have the perfect style for every occasion. The Brooke Taverner Summer Collection. Available in-store or visit brooktaverner.co.uk.
Meet Gary. He's a goldfish. Forgot he needed a new boiler, then forgot again, until clunk. Cold water, no heating. Poor thing was floundering. But then he found Boxed. Ordered online in just a few clicks, and it was installed the next day by a local expert with a free Hive thermostat. Fancy. And now Gary's back to, well, what was he doing again? From fish bowls to family homes, Box.co.uk has the fix. Order before 3 p.m. for next working day installation. Geographical restrictions apply.
Don't miss the latest deals at the GBN shop, proud sponsor of the AI Sports Report.
Former Wales defender Joey Jones has died at the age of 70 following a battle with illness. Jones earned 72 caps for his country and had 3 memorable spells with Wrexham. He also played for Chelsea, Huddersfield and Liverpool during his career as a footballer. During his time at Anfield, he won titles such as the First Division, 2 European Cups, a UEFA Cup and a European Super Cup. He also made history in 1977, becoming the first Welshman in history to lift the European Cup after Liverpool's triumph over Borussia Mönchengladbach in Rome. That's the latest sport. For more, go to gbnews.com.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and pick up the perfect gift for the GB News fan in your life. Members get 20% off all branded merchandise.
Have you ever wondered what becoming a lotto millionaire sounds like?
You want to sit down? I can confirm that you have won £1 million indeed.
That's Terry, finding out he'd won £1 million.
Yes! Oh my God!
Lotto from the National Lottery. Will you be the next millionaire? Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over. Stay ahead.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just gone 1:30. Now, Sir Keir Starmer insists there's lots of housing available for both homeless and asylum seekers.
Yes, the liaison committee yesterday put it to the Prime Minister that local councils looking to house both the homeless and homeless families were competing with the Home Office, which is seeking to house asylum seekers at the same time.
Well, here's what the Prime Minister had to say when grilled.
What other accommodation precisely are you planning to take over to provide temporary accommodation for families?
Oh, there's lots of housing in many local authorities that can be used, and we're identifying where it can be used. But I mean, look,
could you give us? Have you got any examples you can give us?
No, but I'll write in and give you details.
Because I could say certainly in a number of our local authorities, already picking up from around the table, there isn't a lot of spare housing available. If there were, councils would be able to be dealing with it by now.
Well, exactly, which is why leaving a huge tens of thousands of unprocessed asylum seekers that need to be housed is a huge problem.
So you'll be putting homeless families into those hotels?
No. We're looking at what accommodation is available, and I'll make sure that we send a detailed letter.
Okay, well, we certainly look forward to receiving that detailed note. I'm sure councils will be breathless waiting for it.
Not great, is it?
Absolutely forensic there from Meg Hillier, the chair of both the Treasury Select Committee and the Liaison Committee, as we were seeing there. I mean, Prime Minister floundering a little bit.
A little bit. Shall we speak to the former Labour MP, Lord Steve McCabe, on this? Steve, it takes a very quick Google search to find out what the social housing lists are like in this country. And apparently there are 1.3 million households waiting for accommodation. I mean, what is Keir Starmer talking about?
Well, I think he was talking about two things. I think he was, one, saying that there have to be a range of measures to deal with asylum seekers, and that is what the government are working on at the moment. And I think he was also suggesting that all local authorities have to play an equal part in dealing with homelessness problems. For example, I mean, Meg Hillier is a London MP. She'll know as well as me that many London authorities don't play their full part in housing homeless. That's why they export so many homeless people to places like Birmingham.
Yeah, but because of the migrant crisis, partly in the Channel, we need more. We don't just need for homeless. We need for people who've just arrived on these shores illegally.
Well, as I say, I think we need a variety of different measures. Some people should go to reception camps. Some should go to reception centres. Should be addressed through offshore processing. This is not something that's going to be dealt by one single
answer. That's not happening, is it, Steve McCabe? That's not what's happening. When people are coming over here, they're being put in the system and immediately put up in hotel accommodation or in a military barrack to then be given private accommodation. No one's going into a detention centre.
Well, I said a reception centre, and I think what the Prime Minister was trying to say is he wants to see a full range of measures deployed. But look, I mean, it's easy to tell us, and I'm not suggesting there is not a homeless problem, but I mean, these figures of 1.3 million, I don't know when these lists were last reviewed, but I do know that a report just a couple of months ago looking at a few authorities in London found 50,000 ghost tenancies, people who'd been allocated social housing because they claimed to be homeless and who were then renting it out on things like Airbnb. It's estimated it's costing us about £1 billion a year for that kind of fraud alone.
I mean, that is a new statistic to my ears. But of course, the Labour Party campaigned during the election to great effect, talking about the housing shortage in this country. I mean, compared to the average developed European country, we're 4 million homes short. Compared to France, we're about 6 million homes short per person. I mean, this is an extraordinary comparison to these other countries. We just haven't built enough homes. The Labour Party got elected on the basis of reforming planning, taking a bulldozer to those planning restrictions to build those more homes. And yet, just last week, in the House of Lords, in the legislative chamber in which you sit, the government tabled amendments to its own planning and infrastructure bill that will water down the reforms to make it easier to build things like homes or new infrastructure, that will put more roadblocks in the way to getting that stuff built. I mean, this is a government that is U-turning on one of its signature economic pledges.
Well, you might have noticed that the government has suffered a number of defeats in the House of Lords at the hands of the Tory party. Of course, we're having to compromise on some of the legislation, but the faster that legislation goes through, the faster that spurious attempts to block housing development by seeking judicial reviews and other measures, the better the chances we are going to have of making some progress.
But the new amendment that the government tabled gives powers to an unaccountable quango called Natural England to block more development.
Well, what we're trying to do is actually find a simple process to deal with legitimate concerns and complaints without the whole thing dragging through the legal process for a very lengthy time, costing a great deal of taxpayers' money and preventing housing development.
OK, well, Steve McCabe, Lord Steve McCabe, thank you very much indeed. A former Labour MP as well. Thank you for your time. I mean, there is a question of priorities. There's always a question of resources. You know, who should be at the top of the list, the British homeless or refugees?
Well, and frankly, given that there is very little being built in this country, neither at the moment.
No one
is the answer.
And there's 36,000 households just in London waiting for accommodation. Anyway, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up. Yes, a cabinet war. Leaks reveal the Chancellor has slapped down Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner's attempts to give cash-strapped councils the power to charge tourist taxes. There seems to be a lot of damaging leaking going on, doesn't it?
Bard after the break.
I'd much rather see a great big strapping male police officer with a female, but female police officers are incredibly...
Feel comfortable if there were two female trained police officers.
I think they look vulnerable, but, you know, that's just my opinion.
Yes, Reform MP Sarah Pochin says that female officers should be deployed to more sensitive situations after female officers have been hurt in recent incidents. Does she have a point? That's after your news.
Good afternoon to you. Our headlines. Sir James Cleverly has returned to frontline politics as the Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch reshuffles her shadow cabinet. He'll go up against Angela Rayner as the Shadow Housing Secretary, having previously served in government as the Foreign and Home Secretary. A man who murdered his wife as she pushed their 7-month-old baby in a pram has been jailed for life with a minimum of 28 years. The justice described Habibur Massim as violent, self-centred, jealous, controlling and coercive. The government is to impose sanctions on people who help migrants come to the UK. The measures will target gang leaders, corrupt police officers, companies selling small boat equipment, and those helping to facilitate money transfers. Police have confirmed the body found in a lake in Cheshire on Monday is that of missing mother Rachel Booth. 38-year-old was last seen on CCTV in a petrol station in the early hours of Saturday morning. And the government signed a deal with OpenAI to explore the use of its advanced systems in areas like justice, security and education. The agreement with the firm behind ChatGPT comes after a similar deal was signed with Google. Those are your headlines. More from me at the top of the hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. For many, a fairly grey summer's day out there, a lot of cloud around, but signs of it brightening up in a few places, a little bit of sunshine poking through, but there are also going to be some showers, maybe even one or two heavy ones later on. Low pressure is in control, sitting just to the north of Scotland. Old weather fronts providing some light rain and drizzle, especially over the Midlands, southeast England, staying fairly damp in western Scotland. Some showers for Northern Ireland, some breaks in the cloud bit of sunshine poking through, maybe lifting the temperatures into the low 20s, 23, 24 possible across the southeast. Many areas close to the average, so high teens, low 20s. Come this afternoon and into this evening, one or two heavy, even thundery showers could break out, most likely over parts of eastern Scotland and northeast England. Staying pretty damp on the west coast of Scotland, but we'll see, as I say, the cloud breaking up in a few places to reveal a little. In parts of northeast England, particularly east and north Yorkshire, could see some heavy, even thundery showers during the afternoon and into the evening, and there'll be a fair scattering of showers coming and going across Wales and southwest England too. Overnight, we'll continue with a lot of clouds. Some heavy showers could break out over the Midlands and South Wales too. Might see a downpour here. Elsewhere, the showers tending to ease. We'll see maybe a few more breaks developing in the cloud as temperatures dip into the low teens. On to Wednesday, again, a lot of cloud for most places, but should see some sunny spells coming through. And again, some heavy showers, most likely tomorrow over parts of East Anglia and southern counties of England. During the afternoon, the potential for a few lively thunderstorms that could drop a lot of rain. A sprinkling of showers for central and southern Scotland, but generally a drier day over the Midlands and parts of Wales. And again, temperatures high teens or low 20s.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
And I would